What's up, everyone? I'm Justin Burkholtz. Thank you for watching. It's time for another book review. This week, I'll be reviewing one of my favorite books of all time, the phenomenal Recapture the Rapture by Jamie Wheal. So stay tuned because this is a super interesting book. Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to ask you real quickly, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please hit that button for me. Really helps me out. I really want to grow as much as possible this year, and I need your help to do so. Thanks. Now let's get back to the episode. All right, so this video was meant to come out on Wednesday this week. Hopefully, book reviews will be coming out on Wednesdays in the future. I unfortunately had some water damage emergency situations this week that delayed things a little bit, but here we go. So today we're talking about Recapture the Rapture by Jamie Wheal. Now, I just want to read a quick blurb from the inside cover of the dust jacket here because it really puts into perspective what this book is about. So it says, in Recapture the Rapture, we're taking radical research out of the extremes and applying it to the mainstream, to the broader social problem of healing, believing, and belonging. It provides answers to the questions we face: how to replace blind faith with direct experience, how to move from broken to whole, and how to cure isolation with connection. Stated even more plainly, it shows us how to revitalize our bodies, boost our creativity, rekindle our relationships, and answer once and for all the questions of why we are here and what we do now. So, when this book first came out, I was not familiar with Jamie's prior book. He did write at least one book previous to Recapture the Rapture. So some people would have known him from that. I had no idea who he was. So when I heard these really lofty claims and all this praise for the book, I was a little skeptical at first, and I didn't read it right away. I kept hearing from people how good of a book it was, though. And so I said, all right, I'll give in. I'll pick up a copy and see what's going on. I wondered, can it really answer such deep philosophical questions and provide a roadmap for transformative embodied spirituality in one book? But after seeing an interview with Jamie Wheal on one of my favorite podcasts, I believe it was the Aubrey Marcus podcast, I gave in and picked up a copy. Jamie was really impressive in the interview. It was nearly 4 hours long, and he was razor sharp the entire time. Not only that, he spoke with the joy and exuberance of a man half his age, and everything he had to say was profound. I could tell he was doing something right, and I wanted to know more. As soon as I started reading Recapture the Rapture, I was hooked. Jamie's background in anthropology and systems analysis really helps him astutely diagnose the meaning meta crisis that we face today and trace a rough history of how we got here. Namely, from the collapse of meaning 1.0, which was traditional religion, and meaning 2.0, which was modern liberalism, which has left us in a world devoid of meaning. Of course, this won't be a surprise to anyone familiar with the work of people like John Vervaeke and his amazing series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which you should definitely watch if you have not. But Jamie doesn't stop there. The book is broken up into 3 sections. Number 1 is Choose Your Own Apocalypse. Number 2, The Alchemist's Cookbook. And number 3, Ethical Cult Building. Catchy titles, I know. But what lies underneath is nothing short of remarkable. The first section talks about the collapse of meaning 1.0 and meaning 2.0 and ends by asking the question, what would meaning 3.0 look like? Which is probably one of the most important questions that any of us can ask today. In order to answer this question, he looks to design firm IDEO for inspiration. And here's a quote from the book. IDEO's method is based on 3 principles: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. In the first phase, inspiration, you learn directly from the people you're designing for as you come to deeply understand their needs. In the second phase, ideation, you'll prototype possible solutions. And in the third and final phase, implementation, you'll bring your solution to life and eventually to market. So that's what this book is all about, bringing a human-centered design process to the challenge of meaning. If part one has been about deeply understanding our need for exponential meaning, part two is all about prototyping possible solutions. And part three will take those insights and explore ways to implement these ideas in the larger world. That was a quote from section one of Recapture the Rapture. This is a great method for designing anything meant for humans. And he also acknowledges that for Meaning 3.0 to have enough of an impact to change our current course, it needs to be what he calls broadly relevant and locally adaptive, to make it as inclusive as possible. To meet that goal, he says it needs to meet three design criteria borrowed from Meaning 2.0, which is it needs to be open source, it needs to be scalable, and it needs to be anti-fragile. For any solution to the meaning crisis to be effective, it will need to meet all three criteria. Otherwise, it will never reach the critical level of penetration needed to create cultural transformation. Section 2 of the book builds upon this solid foundation and attempts to provide a practical protocol for building Meaning 3.0 by combining the pro-social functions of traditional 1.0, which are faith, inspiration, healing, and connection, and the inclusive promises of 2.0, which were modernism, being open source, scalable, and anti-fragile. And this is the exact roadmap I use to create my own system of mysticism that I teach on my blog and elsewhere. Jamie looks to the latest scientific research on embodied spirituality, flow states, and mystical experiences to find the most reliable and potent practices for propelling humans into higher states of consciousness, which fall into 5 categories that make up the chapters of section 2 of the book. Those are respiration, embodiment, sexuality, sacraments, and music. Each chapter goes into the anthropology, the neurophysiology, and practical applications of the selected category while providing incredible related stories. This advanced my knowledge of human physiology more than anything since my anatomy and physiology courses in school. It really did. While most people attempting to provide solutions to the meaning crisis show clear bias in their treatment of modern embodied spirituality, Jamie manages to steer clear of that trap and review the literature objectively. For example, he spends 2 whole chapters reviewing the potential for sexuality to catalyze spiritual growth. And the research he shares completely blew my mind and forever altered the way that I think about sex and sexuality. It turns out that the most reliable method for producing profound mystical experiences is different for men and women, but you probably won't hear that anywhere else. The Alchemist's Cookbook, section 2 of the book, outlines practices within each category for raising consciousness and even provides examples of how to combine them in new and remarkable ways and schedule them for a life of maximum meaning, inspiration, and creativity. But the book still doesn't end there. Each section could easily be a whole book unto itself, and Jamie really wanted to provide a comprehensive answer to the meaning crisis, which requires that we move beyond simply personal spiritual practices to community. And that's what section 3, titled Ethical Cult Building, is all about. That title may sound strange to you if you aren't used to religious studies. You might be thinking that ethical cult is an oxymoron or an impossibility. But Jamie isn't referring to the modern concept of the cult. He's referring to the academic definition of a cult, which is simply a set of religious devotional practices that is related to a particular figure or is frequently associated with a particular place. What you're thinking of Jamie calls a culty cult. In other words, an unethical cult. It turns out that we have an innate human need to worship with others, to connect with others who believe and practice like we do. And that need has been starved ever since the decline of Meeting 1.0. Unfortunately, many of the modern attempts to form spiritual communities have fallen prey to corruption and other pitfalls that Jamie explicitly provides a roadmap to avoid in his section on ethical cult building. Communities that provide all three dimensions of transformative spirituality, which are ecstasis, catharsis, and communitas, can avoid corruption while adhering to the checklist that he provides. So he provides a checklist of what not to do, as well as what the community needs to come together and agree upon for maximum coherence and impact on culture. Looking to our religious heritage again, what he calls Meaning 1.0, he identifies 5 core elements for forming a stable and ethical spiritual community. Those are metaphysics, ethics, sacraments, scriptures, and deities. Metaphysics provides the solid ground for us to stand on to make sense of epiphanies and paradoxes and make sure we don't get destabilized or disoriented as we explore the great mysteries of life. Ethics provide the much needed guardrails to keep the community from going astray into the culty cult territory. As Jamie says, quote, "If there aren't any guardrails to this experiment, no higher purpose or service, then it will be captured by bliss junkies endlessly chasing states, epiphany whores craving catharsis, or gutless groupies following gurus. Ethics are like the tail rotor on a helicopter. Without them, we just spin in circles." Sacraments provide reliable techniques of ecstasy to deliver direct experience of the sacred, revelatory insights, and potent bonding. And they help prevent what Jamie calls voltage drop, as the immediate gnosis of a founder dwindles as it gets handed down. This is something that William James also warned against in his monumental work, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And this is one of my favorite quotes of his, so sorry it's not from this book, but it's relevant. William James stated, "A genuine first-hand religious experience is bound to be a heterodoxy to its witnesses, the prophet appearing as a mere lonely madman. If his doctrine prove contagious enough to spread to any others, it becomes a definite and labeled heresy. If it then still proved contagious enough to triumph over persecution, it becomes itself an orthodoxy. And when a religion has become an orthodoxy, its day of inwardness is over. The spring is dry. The faithful live at second hand exclusively and stone the prophets in their turn. The new church, in spite of whatever human goodness it may foster, can be henceforth counted on as a staunch ally in every attempt to stifle the spontaneous religious spirit and to stop all later bubblings of the fountain from which in purer days it drew its own supply of inspiration." And scriptures provide us with the necessary narratives that we need to make sense of our lives and of those who have come before us. They provide connection to the past and examples of exemplars of humanity for us to aspire to. And lastly, deities provide us a higher power to aspire and answer to. Otherwise, we are left with nothing but self-interest, and that just hasn't worked out very well. All right, so I know I blew through that quickly. There's a lot going on in Recapture the Rapture. It is such a cool book. All of the different practices they talk about, the breath work, the music, the embodied practices, the sexual practices, the sacraments, everything, and how they can work together. He discusses how they actually work on our physiology to propel us into altered states and mystical states and higher states of consciousness. It's all really fascinating. He provides anthropological and historical background as to why we got to this place with the lack of meaning and how we might form a new meaning 3.0 and actually bring everyone along board on the way instead of leaving so many people in the dust as we have in the past. So I really, really love this book, Recapture the Rapture. I think if you are interested at all in any of the philosophical questions that it brings up, or in the actual just physical practices and learning more about your body and how to use things like your breath and music and other natural parts of your body to promote your health and creativity and vigor and all that kind of stuff. It's just absolutely fascinating. So, to recap, the idea of the book is we as humanity are hurtling towards catastrophe. We can all feel it. And if we don't change course soon, humanity itself may not persevere. But all is not lost. Some of humanity's brightest minds are aware of the problem and are zealously working on solutions. And in Recapture the Rapture, Jamie Wheal has provided one of the most eloquent and thorough answers that has been formulated so far. Few books have had as great an impact on me and my work as this one. As one reviewer stated, the death of belief has led to a collapse of meaning, and many of us are looking to neuroscience and psychology for inspiration and understanding. This enrapturing book not only details various drivers of our cultural evolution, but becomes one itself. Well, if that sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend that you pick up a copy and read it for yourself. I've read through the entire book twice, and I've come back to it to reference many, many times throughout different projects or different times in my life when I just needed some inspiration or wanted to figure out what to do to adjust my own rituals and routines and practices to continue my personal physical and spiritual development. If any of that sounds interesting to you, definitely pick up the book. However, I just want to quickly put a warning out there. It is kind of adult in some of the themes. Like I said, there's a couple of chapters on sex and sexuality. There's other chapters that may be disturbing or inappropriate for people who are, underage or children. So I don't necessarily recommend this book to children or even necessarily adolescents. It's really for more mature adults. So, who can have an open mind about things like sacraments and sexuality and altered states of consciousness and combining those with religious practices. This is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable in a really good way, I think. So, once again, Recapture the Rapture, buy a copy. It's one of the best books ever written. All right, well, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked the review. Hope you pick up a copy of Jamie's book and read it. If you haven't seen my other book reviews, check those out. I have a whole list going there. I plan to release more every Wednesday moving forward here. I have a ton of books I want to review about topics like science and spirituality, history, archaeology, religious studies, scientific research on things like mystical experiences and paranormal, effects and things like that. All kinds of cool books I have waiting to be reviewed for you guys. I'm way behind. I'm going to get caught up, I swear. So they're coming to you soon. And if you want to support me and my work here, I actually wrote and published a couple books myself. So you can see those on the shelf behind me here, Foundations and Luna. There will be links to those below. If you pick up a copy from my publisher, that really helps me out. And you'll learn a bunch of cool stuff about spirituality and nature and meditation and breath work and prayer and all the kind of stuff I like to talk about. I also have a Patreon if you want to support me that way. Either way, hit subscribe, hit the like button. I'll see you next week.